All right, welcome to technical session number 10. And just a general reminder, as we move through these technical sessions, we're going to be jumping around just a little bit because we're trying to marry up all the technical session across the platforms that we are using. This particular one, we're going to be referring to drives and the various types. Our objectives are going to be to describe the purposes, types, characteristics of storage devices of various types. Compare and contrast various connection interfaces for the drives and their characteristics and purposes. Explain the purpose and types of RAID. Really want to pay attention for that one. That is a big one for the exam. They love RAID. Describe the process for installing storage devices and identify common hard drive problems and describe how to solve them. All right. Our BSMs for this particular technical session that we're going to be focusing on, customer focus, because without them, we are not here. Must be sure we are fixing the customer first, taking care of their needs, and empathizing with the problems that they're having, for even if we cannot solve the problem, they at least know and understand that we did everything feasible or possible to try to resolve their issues. Also, maintaining a growth mindset in the IT field is a must. This is a continual learning career path. All right, so what are drives? In essence, it's kind of like the long-term memory of a computer. Your RAM is your short-term memory. The CPU is the algorithmic portion of the brain. And then you have the drives, which are long-term storage. And it is a device that specifically only holds information on a recording medium. And the most common types of drives at the time of this particular session being written, or the time of the last iteration of CompTIA, were optical drives and hard drives, though there are others out there. These are the main categories that we'll be focusing on. You have your optical drives, which encompasses your compact disc, Blu-ray, CDs, and then now 4K drives as well. You have your standard HDD or mechanical hard drives. They have things that distinguish them, like a magnetic head used to read and write. They write that information onto platters, and they have various electron or mechanical parts that we will have to know and identify. We have solid state hard drives, which are kind of a more recent iteration. They are much faster than mechanical drives. They have no mechanical parts themselves, and they are stored in blocks much like flash drives. And then we have hybrid drives, which is a combination of the HDD mechanicals and the SDD solid states. And then we have the old school tape drives. Yes, these are still in use because they happen to be one of the best ways to store information long-term and not have it degrade. But it also operates off of a magnetic medium. So, optical drives, broken down into a few different sectors here. We have our compact discs. They have a maximum capacity around 700 megabytes, data rate around 150 kilobytes per second, excuse me. Now, yes, you do need to know capacities. Speed, little lax on, but you definitely need to know the capacities of these different storage mediums. So when you get into DVDs, they started getting a little creative. First, it was single-sided, single layer CD, rewrite. And you could get up to 4.7 gigabytes on a CD. That was a really, really big jump for that time period. And then they figured out that with different types of lasers, they could actually multi-layer the drives, double their capacity. So you got double-sided single layer, 9.4, single side double layer, 8.5, double side double layer, 17.1. So understand that your DVD range is in between 4.7 and 17.1. But they will ask you a question at some point about single side, single layer, double side, single layer, you know, around that with those capacities. Did you get a question like that, Marvin? I know I did.
Yeah, but you know, I crushed it because you know I used to sell all these blank CDs when I was in college.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's right.
All
So
that
you didn't even have to study this part.
I just remembered all people would buy them in the 100 packs because you know they were bootlegging movies and music.
Okay.
So it was a big time. So
back when you were, you know, getting to know all this stuff and perfecting the King method, I was just running trucks.
See. But I promise you, some of your truck drivers watching bootleg movies in the trucks.
I guarantee they were.
Because that's when those portable DVD players was really big too, you know?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Blu-ray. They only have 3 different versions. That gets single side, single layer, single side, double layer, and the double side, double layer. So it went from 25 up to 100. Also, your data rate is much faster as well. So you might want to take a screenshot of this picture. Also, we'll be throwing the slideshow into Slack so that you can, you know, revisit this. There's going to be quite a bit of data in this particular presentation that you're going to want to remember. Oh, sorry. Any questions with regards to optical drives? Utilizes a laser to read and write information off of a disk. Yes, Alan.
Video game drives, that would kind of be like a part of the optical, or that's something we're going to cover like later on in this tech session.
What kind of drive?
Like the optical drive for like a PlayStation or something.
Well, the optical drive for a PlayStation is just a Blu-ray.
Okay.
So they are utilizing these technologies. Xbox used DVD up until the most recent iteration. They started stepping up to, well, they had an HD drive in there for a while until that technology went belly up. And then they, most recent iteration, I think, of the Xbox, they upgraded finally to Blu-ray. Sony's been on Blu-ray for, I think, since the PlayStation 3. Prior to that, they were on DVD. But yeah, even the game consoles utilize this particular technology as well.
Those are optical drives. These are the mediums that they read off of, Alan. I don't want you to get confused. So you got the drive in which you put it in, but then these are the medium in which it's being read off of right now, what we're going over right now.
All right. Any other questions? All right, moving along. HDD, hard disk drive, also called mechanical drives. They operate off of platters, which are these round metal plates that are inside the drive. And the data is stored sequentially in tracks, which a track is one of these circles that go around it, kind of like old records. If anybody, you know, was a vinyl collector or is a vinyl collector, data operates in tracks. And then the tracks themselves are broken up into smaller chunks, which are called sectors. Now, the platter itself spins on the spindle, which is the center point of the platter itself. You can have multi-layered platters operating together. You have on the tip of this little arrow here, you have the read-write head, which is the mechanical read and write mechanism for the drive itself, where it, you know, drops the information to and reads the information off of. That is attached to the actuator arm, is what holds the head in place. And then when you get to the back of the actuator arm, there is a little circle here, which is the axis or the actuator axis that allows the head to pivot and move for writing on the drives. The motor that drives that allows that to happen, is the actuator itself, which is behind the axis. And then along the back end of the drive, here you can see you have your IDE connectors, you have your 4-pin mini connectors, and then a jumper block as well. Also, they don't show it in this particular one, but from the actuator axis to the IDE connector, you would see a ribbon connecting, and that is your data ribbon. This is the internal workings of a mechanical hard drive. Yes, you do need to know and be able to recognize all of these parts. Yes, Umberto.
What is the jumper block for?
Jumper block, if you wanted to connect multiple drives together.
Yeah, that's what it's for. For it to realize where who has priority.
Yeah, primary and secondary drives.
You got primary, secondary. They also call it master slave, but it lets you know who has priority on your drives. What drive is going to be used in the primary fashion versus secondary.
Questions so far with regards to the anatomy of a hard drive? Good. All right. Jimmy. Get my annotator out here. What is this piece here, Jimmy?
Head.
That's this long, skinny piece right here. What is that?
That's the head, the reading head.
You agree with that?
Oh, you mean like? Oh, is the arm?
Yeah, that is the arm, actuator arm. Actuator arm. Next, even though she came in clutch for Jimmy, TK, what do we have right here? This centerpiece right there.
Is that the spindle?
That absolutely is the spindle. Very good. Let's see here, Romario. This big round thing here.
That would be the platter.
That would be the platter. Don't worry, my writing gets worse as we go along. Next, we have Hannah. Good, clear. I got to erase here. There we go. Makes it better. All right, Hannah, what is this piece right here? Hannah, are you there? All right, Fidel. What is this piece over here, sir?
I'm assuming that is the head.
That is the head. And what is that used for?
I guess writing the data, I guess, writing
Yep.
the movement.
Reading and writing data to and from the platter. So that would be the head. Very good. Ash, what is this piece right here?
Is that actuator?
Do we agree with that?
Mm,
I didn't hear what she said.
Said actuator.
Mhm.
She missing the part.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
No problem. No problem. That's why we're doing this.
Axis, right?
There it is right there.
Axis, yeah.
Actuator axis. Very good. So the axis. Finally, we got this piece right up here. And we have TJ. What is that piece right there, sir?
Can I phone a friend?
Yes, you can phone a friend.
Mario. Thank you.
That is the actuator.
That is the actuator itself. Absolutely. This is the motor that drives this arm on this axis or pivot point so that the head can move back and forth across the platter and read and write the data as required. And then here we can see off to the side right here, the data ribbon, which is how the data is transmitted from the drives to the computer itself. All right, any questions with regards to the anatomy of a hard drive? I would take note of that. It is likely you will see it again. All right. Here we go. Common hard drive rotation speeds. Do you have a question, Evan, or you still just have your hand up? Okay. So
We actually forgot a part from the drive.
We did? Which part?
The main piece, the main PCB. The little orange part, right? The little orange part.
Or right here?
No, at the very top, like in the left corner.
Up there?
Yeah.
They will typically identify that as a data ribbon.
Okay.
But the book also has all this laid out in the anatomy. Has anybody started receiving their physical books? Those of you who ordered physical books, have they arrived yet? Anybody? Alan, beautiful. When did yours arrive?
Yesterday.
Yesterday. So they should be arriving probably within the next day or two. So is Alan the only one who received his?
I received mine
Luis?
yesterday.
Hannah got hers. Beautiful.
Luis says he got his.
Yep. So we at least got 3 more to come. More to come. So, all right. Any other questions with regards to hard drives? So, Alan, was the book heavier than you thought it would be?
Bruh. Go to the gym, right? I was like, oh, let me get this box out my door, man. I was like, nah, it's not that heavy. I had to pick it up with 2 arms, man.
You try to do the quick 2-finger lift and it doesn't work.
Yeah, it was a 2-hander, man.
You gotta go back for a regrip. So going back to hard drives are typically rated with regards to their spindle speeds. They can range from around 5,400 RPMs all the way up to 15,000 RPMs. This will be a determining factor of how fast the drive can read or write information to the drives themselves. Also, overall size for hard drives, how big they are. Standard size for desktops, 3.5 inches. That is your standard hard drive size for a desktop. Laptops, they can get into 2.5 is your most common, and then they can drop down to 1.8. But your typical sizes that you will come across are 3.5 and 2.5. Question is, can you put a laptop hard drive into a desktop? How would you be able to do that? It's not going to sit there.
Into or connected to.
Wouldn't it be too
Install
small?
it into a hard drive. Yeah, there we go. That's part of the problem, Janina. Yeah, but you have about a 1-inch difference. So are we just going to like just throw it in there so it rattles around? I mean, what do we do? I mean, can you install?
Put it in an adapter?
There you go. They actually make adapters that will convert a 2.5-inch drive so that it will fit into a standard 3.5-inch bay for a desktop. This is most commonly seen with your solid state drives, because solid state drives, they don't typically make them full size for the desktops. Most often they just go ahead and make one size at 2.5. And if you're going to install it into a desktop, there's an adapter, you seat it in, and then you plug it in.
Got a question, and someone asked, what would we consider a low-end laptop? I think that's kind of poorly worded, because that hard drive size can reflect a smaller form factor.
Mm-hmm.
So you can,
like with the advent of Air books and things like that.
Right. Those are nicer, but for the most part, if anyone have any kids and they went to school and they was like gifted a notebook for whatever, those, I won't just say Chromebook, but some of those smaller, all built in one type deals would have smaller hard drives. And I guess you can call it low end, but it's really, we're just saying smaller. So don't want to get too caught up on low
at
end.
this particular time. That might have been the case, but now the form factors are getting smaller for most laptops, so they are pushing in that direction. So also bear in mind, I do have to keep reminding, the information we are presenting at times can be a little bit on the older side, because that is the current iteration of CompTIA, which is why we will distinguish on several occasions. For the exam, this is the case. In real life, this is what you'll likely see. All right. Solid state drives, the way of the future. These drives, no moving parts, which is wonderful because they can take some more abuse. If anybody remembers the early iterations of the iPods, they still had mechanical drives in those things. And you drop that sucker one time when it's running, and it is a paperweight. It does not work anymore. Solid state drives can take significantly more abuse, as well as they are more tolerant to heat changes than the mechanical drives themselves. They are less susceptible to physical shock, and they are much faster for read and write speeds. Downside is they are more expensive per gigabyte than your standard mechanical drive. So for extremely large data storage mediums, you will still see people utilizing mechanical drives for that, just because in order to get to solid state drives of that size, it can become very cost prohibitive. But that is at the cost of speed for read and write. Where else do we see solid state drives rather than just hard drives?
Flash drives.
Flash drives. That's the most common way you will see them, is the USB flash drives. Those are both a wonderful thing and the bane of IT's existence, are the USB flash drives. But we will get into that a little bit more when we get to security. All right. Main types of solid state drives that you will come across. You have your typical flash, which we just talked about. These would be your thumb drives, jump drives, travel drives. They're all interchangeable names that you'll hear people use over time, depending on, you know, how they heard it first and, you know, what is the colloquial usage in that area at that time. They are hot swappable. They do not require a shutdown, although it is still highly recommended that you treat them as warm swappable and eject the drive before you pull it, just for safety's sake, because you still can run the risk of damaging the drive if you remove it while it's actually running. Compact flash, or CF drives. You have two types. You have the type 1 and type 2. One is about 3 millimeter thick. One is about 5 millimeter thick. And they're on older laptops. You will see slots on the side of the computer where you can actually insert these, and they serve different functions. I don't particularly have any. Did you have a physical example of that, Marvin? I know we did. Somebody in the last class had it. No?
No, sir, I do not have it.
Okay. Might have been Lazaro that had that. But you know,
he has cameras, so yeah, I can see him having it. Yeah.
So yeah, you don't typically see these like slots still available on laptops much nowadays. But there was like 2 ports on the side, would allow for 2 compact flash drives to be inserted at that point. SD cards, for those of you Android users out there, you'll probably be familiar with some of these, especially the micro SDs. You have the micro, the mini, the X. They're used in cameras, phones, GoPros, all kinds of stuff like that nowadays. You can get a massive amount of storage on a very small drive. So you would have, you know, predominantly this would be in the photography and digital camera arena, but they also have ported them over into phones. Now you have your hard drives, which would be your standard 2.5, 1.8, and 3.5 inch drives. As we stated earlier, the 3.5s are rare because they typically will take a 2.5 and throw it in an adapter and plug it in. That is the most efficient way to get that done. Yes, Evan.
You remember how the PlayStation 2 had memory cards? Would that be considered a flash drive?
To a degree, yes.
Okay.
He took it
Xbox
back.
had something similar.
He took it back. I remember those. He used to sit right on top of the joist, the controller, that little slot right on top.
Yep. That was a flash drive.
That was in a sense, it sure was. Good call, Evan.
Proprietary build for PlayStation. Xbox had their own proprietary ones. Even their hard drives, man, they make their hard drives difficult to deal with too. But if you know how to repartition, you can get a cheap version and make it yourself. All right, so max capacity at the time, roughly about 16 terabytes as of 2015. That has gone up since then. Typical interface for these drives is going to be your SATA drive or your SATA ports, your PCIEs, and then there's the SCSI, which they were trying to go for one acronym. No, that was the SCXI, right?
I know this is SCSI, but
this is SCSI. Yeah, sorry, they were trying to go for something. They were actually trying to go for something else, but it actually people picked up on and started using SCSI as the short name for this one, which is an internal cable. Looks kind of like a printer cable, but it is slightly different. And then you have your PCIe, which is your extremely fast connection, and your SATAs as well. Now, next we have our eMMC, embedded multimedia controller. Flash memory, it's a little bit slower than your solid state, but not too bad, but it is also less expensive than your solid states. Typically used in your smartphones and your tablets, stuff like that. It is soldered directly onto the board. So typically it is, if that memory fails, it is a replace the unit issue. Questions so far with the different types of solid state drives? Going back, we have our flash, compact flash, SD or secure digital, your standard hard drive SSD, and then your eMMC, which is slower, but utilized more in tablets and phones. Android utilizes the eMMC, but they essentially backfill it with the SD cards to expand your memory.
Which sucks, because if that stops working, you can't even use it.
Yep. But typically the lifespan of the drives most often is longer than the lifespan of the phone. Typically people see issue with the battery first. And now they're making that so where it's, a surgical procedure to replace your battery. In the older Androids, you used to be able to just snap a battery out, snap another one in, you're good to go. Now they're making it all a single solid case, and you actually have to crack the case and get it open to be able to actually replace the battery, kind of taking Apple's lead in that particular case.
Money.
Yep. That's why I learned how to do it myself. All right. Now, here are some examples of various types of SSD cards. Many of these will look pretty familiar to you if you have utilized cameras or various other things along the way. Let's see here. This would be, your standard compact flash. That was a little bit older camera. For DSLRs, when they were first coming out, they didn't have a whole ton of storage. But it was as the industry was evolving and allowed a lot more freedom than utilizing actual film at that point. Then we moved over into the SD cards, this. And then eventually now we've gone to the micros that are extremely high capacity and small form factor as well.
See you,
I
Jordan.
never.
Kelly Jordan made mention that the Pro Duo was the memory card for the PlayStation. I was going to point that out.
Oh, right here.
Does anybody know what that? Yeah, it's the memory stick is what it's called, and the cameras that it serviced was the Sony digital cameras, and it looked like a stick of gum. That's how I remember it. But it also worked in the PlayStation Portable. So you guys are sharp, man. You're connecting the dots that are there, but it helps drive how you remember this stuff. So I'm glad that you're able to, reach back and connect some of those dots.
Back in the HD or high def optical drive wars, those of you who had, game consoles, can you tell me why PlayStation went Blu-ray and HD, or Microsoft Xbox, or I just gave it away. Xbox went HD. HD was owned by Microsoft, so it's proprietary to them. Sony, which was Blu-ray, owns PlayStation. So neither would allow or would use the competitor's technology in their machines. Xbox, who wanted to die on that hill even after the entire market went Blu-ray, still refused to convert over to Blu-ray for at least 2 generations, I believe, of Xboxes. now they've finally just given up and they went ahead and moved over.
And at this point, it's a mute point because everybody's all streaming. So everything is available through a subscription now. But you're right. You got some stubborn people. And I mean, typically you win and lose in those situations. So
for those of you who are big movie fans, don't get rid of your media. Because they're editing those movies like crazy, changing them. And making a lot of them unavailable. So if you have those movies, don't give them up. I ripped down all my DVDs to hard drives and then put everything in big sleeves and then stored the sleeves. Not going to give up my medium just for that because of that very reason. Go ahead, Mark.
I have or had a Western Digital 3 terabyte cloud drive. Had hundreds of movies on it. When they did an update back in March, it bricked it.
Yep.
I was so mad. I lost all those movies. And the way I don't think there's anything I can do with that drive anymore because for some reason the operating system won't reload. So
yeah,
it's useless.
And that does happen. I mean, I've usually you lose a big drive like that one time. Typically that happens to you one time. And thankfully it happened to me early on. I am so paranoid because I have a 16 terabyte drive hooked up to my computer with all my movies and media and all that stuff on it. I was a big movie collector. So was my wife before we met. And then when we put our collections together, it was a lot. So when I ripped it all down, I lost it halfway through, and that was like a month's worth of work. So at that point, I bought 2 drives, and then I loaded everything up onto 2 drives, and then I was like, you know what? Let me just be extra safe, and I ended up buying a 3rd drive. So I have a 3rd drive that I keep in a safety deposit box that has all my stuff, like all my photos from like, you know, my grandparents, all that stuff when they were kids, digitally, you know, loaded on there, my movies, all that stuff in a safety deposit box. And then I have my main drive I operate off of, and then a backup at the house that I update the backup probably once a month. And then my safety deposit box one I probably update that twice a year. But I've become so paranoid about that just because like I have family photos that are irreplaceable and all that kind of stuff. So, and I'm not overly trusting of cloud at the moment.
Yeah, Western Digital said sorry, and that was it.
Yeah, man, that's awful. That's so awful.
Sorry for your loss. So, any other questions with regards to this? Many of these you'll know kind of on site, so you just develop a little bit more familiarity, just know what you're looking at. With regards to the compact flash drives or SD drives. All right, next. These are the external card readers. Some computers actually have these built into the front of them where you can use several different types of ST drives. But others, they have where you can have an external reader or something like that. I have one that actually plugs into my USB and it'll read an SD or a micro SD from my DSLR. Really nice adapter. Some of these are a lot more robust than that particular one and can rip down those images very, very quickly, especially if you're doing stuff like GoPros, which have massive file sizes for the HD video, stuff like that. But this is typically the other end of those drives, what you would be using to read them. Any questions so far with regards to that? All right. I'm gonna pause the video here for just long, unfortunately. Here we go. SSD drives, kind of an example of what they look like on the inside. If you remember looking at the RAM modules, they look kind of the same. This is what it would be if you remove the casing in the upper left here. You have all these chips here, and that is the main storage medium rather than the platters that we use on the mechanical drives themselves. Most likely what you'll be seeing when you're dealing with internal hard drives, SSD drives, would be on your bottom left here. This is what it would look like with the casing on it. They do have versions like in the upper right where you're going to be using the PCIe slots for the memory devices. What's all this stuff over here? I mean, what does this look like to you guys? All this. What is all that? Who wants to take a guess? Got one here too. It's a little different. What's this?
CPUs?
Are those pins?
Yeah, so what would that be an indicator of? These little pins sticking up here. These
It's
are like these are long little blades like that. Should look familiar when we were looking at hard drives. How do we identify the North Bridge?
Close to the CPU.
Okay, and how do we point it out on the motherboard? How do we know? What did you say,
Heat
TK? Yes.
Heat sink.
Yes, there you
heat
go.
sink.
This is like heat sinks that are on top of these drives. You got one here, and you got these long blades here to help distribute the heat from your solid state drive. Now down here, anybody who's into gaming might know exactly what that is. If you have built a gaming PC, anybody want to take a stab at what kind of memory that is?
A graphics card? I'm not sure.
Not a graphics card. This would be from the reading, or if you were big into gaming, you would know what this one is, because of this type of memory is very expensive per gigabyte, but blazing fast. This is what's called M.2 memory. It docks right into the motherboard, and it is very, very fast memory, but it's also excessively expensive per gigabyte. But it is also a form of solid state drive.
It varies, Jimmy, but keep in mind with what Kelly just said, how it docks directly on the motherboard. You'll learn this, but a lot of people use it as an opportunity to store their operating system, so their computer logs on super quick, and then they'll have a regular mechanical or a regular SSD drive for storage. So it's a way to just separate it a little bit, keep your computer going as fast as it can. So
your operating systems, drivers, different things that you're going to want to have very, very low latency and quick response, you would put on your M.2, and then much of your long-term storage would then go onto an SSD or a mechanical drive at that point.
yeah, Ms. Diaz wants you to repeat the names. So the bottom one is M.2, and the one up top is just a PCIe drive, solid state drive. So if you
this is
when you
just
think
a standard SSD.
standard, yeah.
This is a standard SSD with the covering off, just exposing the chips in it themselves. Right. Hybrid drives. This typically is the combination of a mechanical and an SSD combined into one. So you have the dual drive hybrid, which contains both the mechanical HDD as well as the SDD into a single unit. And it will store your fast response components like your operating system and stuff like that onto the flash memory, and then use the mechanical drive for long-term storage. It does not need as quick of a response time. And then you also have the solid state hybrid, which has two essentially solid state drives in the one, and one is dedicated more towards performance, one is a little more towards long-term storage themselves. Tape drives. This is one that is often forgotten just because it is very much a legacy technology. If you remember like the old spy movies where you see like the reel-to-reels in the computer rooms where the computers are like spinning, you know, the what looks like old tape deck reels and stuff between two drives and reading it that way. That was essentially a tape drive. They still to this day utilize tape drives for large backups and long-term storage. They hold a ton of data, but they are also very, very slow in comparison to other modern iterations like flash drives and things like that. So if you're downloading, like you work for a big multinational corporation and you're downloading all your accounting data for the last 2 years, you would put that on a tape drive and then put that into a physical secure location where it cannot be accessed. And then if you wanted to, like if you lost all your data, you could recover from these backups, but it takes a long time to load up this information just because of the way it is stored. So it is good in long term. It doesn't degrade very much, but again, super slow. Internal tape drives can use typically SCSI connectors, PATA, which is the older version of SATA. And you can identify a PATA cable because it is a big, wide, flat ribbon, as opposed to a thin cable like your SATA drives. So like if you've ever seen like the old, it's just like a really long, thin ribbon connector, and you have one on either, you know, like a wide connector on either side. That is a PATA connector versus a SATA, which is the thin cable and then has that L-shaped connector on the end. External tape drives can use USB FireWire or eSATA. What does the E stand for again?
Express.
External.
Which is
External. External.
External.
External.
External. Loving the enthusiasm, Alan.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
But PCIe is express. So
yes,
yeah.
PCIe is express. eSATA is external. All right. How to connect drives to a PC. All drives have interfaces, a way to interact and connect with the motherboard themselves. The connection can be internal or external, depending on the speed and age of the drive that you are dealing with, will determine what type of connector you will use. Some use proprietary connectors with regards to interfacing with the drive, but there are standard ports when you're dealing with the actual computer itself. So we got into a lot of these earlier. We have the IDE, which is that very wide connector that we looked at on the motherboard itself, or PATA. Those tend to be relatively interchangeable. And that is that long flat ribbon with regards to the wires itself. All the wires are just running parallel as opposed to being twisted together. You have your SATA drives, which is the thinner cable, L-shaped connector. And those tend to have twisted pairs internally. Then you have the SCSI connectors. I'll try to find a good picture of a SCSI connector itself. It looks a lot like like an old printer cable, like the DB30s or the DB25s. So it looks a lot like that, but there are some minor differences, but we'll see what we can get with that. All right. Externally, you're operating off of the eSATA or external SATA, still utilizing that L-shaped connector. You have your standard USB, or nowadays you'll see USB-C used a lot, or micro B, but that would still be in that USB family. You have your FireWire, which is going kind of as a legacy technology at this point. And then you have Ethernet, where you can use a network attached storage or storage as a network as a way to storage large amounts of data. All right. Basic definitions of these, you have the IDE, which is the integrated drive electronics. PATA, which is the parallel advanced technology attachment. Easy to remember that all the wires run parallel to each other, and it runs in that long flat ribbon. They have 40 and 80 wire combinations. Some of them have dual connectors on the same ribbon, and that's how you can do primary and secondary drives internally, or that's how they originally would do the primary and secondary drives. Maximum cable length is around 18 inches, which is not that long, but as it is an internal cable inside a computer, that is more than sufficient to get between the motherboard and the drives. PATA drives tend to use the standard Molex power connector. Not very quick. They're only about 133 megabytes per second, excuse me. And we just talked about the two IDE drives can be connected to a single ATA controller. Jumpers on the drive make one the master and the other slave, or primary and secondary. ATA 3 introduced self-monitoring and reporting technology, or SMART technology, with regards to drives. This is something that is also being utilized today to test the viability and health of your hard drives. It is not a perfect system, but it can be an early warning system of imminent drive failure. So SMART drives with regards to hard drives, self-monitoring and reporting technology. Early warning system with regards to hard drives. Now, IDE cables. Here's what we were talking about before. You can see much clearer here than the hand gestures I gave you earlier. It is a much wider cable like this. It is a flat ribbon with the standard IDE connector on each, used to connect to your drives. And then it would connect right here on the back of whatever drive you're using, it being optical, mechanical, and possibly early iterations of solid state, though the vast majority of those went with SATA drives. Questions so far? All right. Next, SATA. It uses serial transmission as opposed to parallel. That's when the S comes in. Creates point-to-point connections, utilizing the host bus adapter. Connects one device to the motherboard, cannot connect more than one. Your motherboard then becomes the interface between the drives, rather than having multi-connections on a single cable. It is smarter or smaller than the PATA. It is not that wide fat ribbon. It is a much smaller form factor, has a much larger cable length capacity. Instead of the 18 inches, it can now run 40, although again, internal drives, rarely will you need to run 40 inches on an internal drive on a computer. You may run that on servers, but typically on computers, not so much. It allows for hot swapping. and has 3 versions, SATA 1, 2, and 3. And then you have SATA Express, which is the E after SATA. The E before SATA is external. The E after is Express. And that's 3.2. And that goes directly into the PCIe and requires motherboard with SATA E support. So the E before SATA means external, E after SATA means Express. And then if it's Express, it deals directly with the PCIe interface. Questions so far? All right. Basic SATA standards. No, you do not need to memorize this, with the exception of possibly the data transfer rate for the versions of SATA. So you have SATA 1 at 1.5 gigabits per second, 2 gives you 3 gigabits per second, and 6. Version 3 gives you 6, but just remembering it doubles each time. All right. Here is a look at a SATA connection port. You can see that nice little L shape that you keep hearing us talking about right here. And then you can see that internally on the wire itself right there, and also right here. So you see that L shape, that should immediately point you to a SATA data cable. The power cable looks a little bit different right here, but it is easily identifiable as the black connector on your power supply, unless you have gone with a power supply for aesthetic reasons. It has a very high power, but again, they can make all of your connectors black because that is the uniform look you were going for. Then you need to pay more attention to the actual connection type itself. So, questions with regards to SATAs? They even allowed on this particular one older legacy power connectors, just in case your power supply has not updated to the typical SATA drives. This would be your 4-pin Molex here, and then here is your mini Molex. All right, SCSI. Extra points if you can guess what the nickname they were actually going for on this before SCSI became the adopted one. But here you can see the it uses, huh?
Fancy.
Very good, TK. That is exactly what they were trying to get. They were trying to get sexy for it, but for some reason SCSI became the most adopted for it. This is typically what they look like internally. They do have that rhombus shape, kind of like your DB connectors. This, man, my drawing gets worse as we go, I swear. So they do still have that rhombus shape, but then they have the pin arrangement is a little bit different internally. And SCSI is typically an internal only connection, inside a computer only. Questions with regards to SCSI connectors, Small Computer System Interface Standards, or SCSI. All right. eSATA looks a little bit different than its internal cousin. See, it has tabs that extend out to either side. Here, you kind of see these tabs jutting out. You do determine, if you're going to get something, please make sure that your computer actually has eSATA ports and is supported by the motherboard that you have. To be able to utilize this, the cables themselves can stretch up to about 2 meters or 6 feet. 7-pin eSATA ports run the same speed as their internal cousins, utilizing SATA 1, 2, or 3. And they do have a slightly different shape as we were just identifying here, but they should be clearly marked on the outside of your computer, either stating eSATA or they might be a red connector as well. Questions with regards to SATA?
On the left picture, I see like it says eSATA Plus. There's a USB logo.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that you can work with USB too? You can stick a USB in?
I do not believe so, but that's something I might need to double check.
Let me do some research, but I don't think so,
Yeah.
TJ, but let me do some research.
It might be that the
question.
eSATA is utilizing USB technology, but I do not believe that is the case. So, but we will verify that. All right. Pulling out here. Dominic, what's number 1, sir?
I'm not sure. I got a little distracted.
All right.
Look at the picture.
SSD.
There you go. Which is short for what? What is what does SSD stand for?
Solid state drive.
There we go. There we go. Thank you. Brittany, can you tell us what number 2 is, please? Brittany, can you tell us what number 2 is?
Not quite, Brittany. We got to look at it a little harder and see. No pun intended. Looking at it a little harder, but and you sent that to me directly. She put hard, but that's not it, right? So,
Well, number 2, right here. What's that?
got some good answers in the chat.
All right, Miss Sims, Marisha Sims, what's number 2? Evan.
It is optical.
Okay. Very good. And more specifically, it is a use the visual clues.
A Blu-ray.
Blu-ray.
Blu-ray optical drive.
There you go. Optical drive, but also, you know, more specifically, a Blu-ray drive. Very good, Evan. Thank you. Number 3. Renzi. Right here.
Is it a SCSI? I don't know. A hard drive. Another kind of hard
It
drive.
is a hard drive. Which is what type? I think you can do it.
Is it a standard? I don't remember.
Okay. You want to phone a friend?
Sure. Alan looks like he's ready to answer something.
I like it. Go for it, Alan.
Hard disk drive.
Okay. What's the other term we use for it?
HDD.
Okay. Keep going. Think about how it operates.
Mechanical.
Mechanical drive. So it is a hard disk drive, HDD, or mechanical drive.
Somebody got to give Mark some lunch money, man. You're killing it in chat.
I like hard drives. Play with them enough and lost enough of them, so I'm always learning.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Now we get to our connectors. So go ahead and grab some here. Kaylin, what is number 1, please? What kind of connection is that? You there, Kaylin?
Try somebody else, sir.
All right. Chris K. What is number 1, please?
SATA.
That is a SATA connector. Very good. Number 2, Alan.
Number 2, that's the Molex.
That would be the power connector. So
Oh,
we'll give
that's
you
the,
partial on that. Well, what about this?
Oh, that's the
data
SCSI.
connector?
The SCSI.
Are you sure?
Nice.
Wide ribbon.
Yeah, that's the PATA.
That is a PATA. That is a PATA. Very good. Next, we have Jordan. Can you please tell us what number 3 is? Data connection.
Mr. SCSI.
That is a SCSI connector. Very good. And you can see your 4-pin Molex and then your mini Molex as well. Did you have a question, Jimmy, or were you just excited to answer?
Yeah, I thought this number 2 was an IDE, or is actually called a PATA.
PATA and IDE can be interchangeable.
Okay.
They're both ribbon cables.
Okay.
So
Now,
good catch. Good catch.
Bonus question for number 1. Chris told us that it was SATA. Can you be more specific? Put it in chat or say it out loud.
External.
Say it again.
External.
There we go. Mark killing it still. So the small one is SATA data. The one next to it is still a SATA cable if it's something in there, but it's SATA power. SATA can be, that cable can they coming off of the power supply, there's a SATA power cable. Whereas what you see right there is data cable, SATA data. I just wanted y'all to know that.
All right. Connectors. Number one. Humberto, what is number one, please?
I think that is a PATA, IDE.
Very good. That is an IDE or PATA. Excellent. Stepped away. Aijan, what is number two, please?
I'm not sure. It looks like something 24 connector. Well, I'm not sure really.
It looks like you're, yeah, I mean, it could be mistaken for your 24 pin port on your motherboard just by the shape of it, but it does have more pins. And it has that long, flat ribbon-like cable attached to it. So what would that make you think of?
I really don't have answer for this. I'm sorry.
No problem. Go ahead, Jimmy.
So that would be the PATA IDE connector?
PATA.
Mm-hmm.
That is correct. Very good. Lastly, Mark, can you tell us what number three is? Your face is very expressive, but I still can't hear you.
Is that the SATA power connector?
Not power.
Oh, I'm sorry. So SATA data connector. I'm sorry. Yes.
Can we be more specific?
Oh no, hold on a second. SATA data. This is eSATA data connector.
There we go.
Isn't it?
That is an eSATA. You can see by the little tabs that
The
stick out
tabs
on the sides.
Right.
And it is not an L-shaped connector like the internal SATAs.
Correct. Yeah.
So there we go. Very good. Thank you, Mark.
What was it again?
An eSATA connector.
Thank you.
No problem. All right. Now for the meat and potatoes of this presentation. RAID arrays, or a redundant array of independent disks. The other way you may hear it is a redundant array of inexpensive disks. Those are the two different ways that you may hear it explained. This is data storage technology that utilizes multiple disk drives and allows to combine these components into a logical unit. Main purpose would be increased efficiency and or redundancy with regards to data storage. One of the big purposes of it is, if one drive fails, the others allow the data to remain safe. This is not always the case, but this is the overall general purpose as to what they mean for the data drives. It is distributed across multiple drives in various different ways, which we're about to go over, which is referred to as RAID levels. The levels you need to know and understand are RAID 0, 1, 5, 0.1, and 1+0. Those are the RAID types that you need to be fully aware of with regards to the exam.
Say that one more time, please. The one, are you talking about the last line? 0, 1, 5, 0.0
Yes, those are the,
+1? Okay.
Yeah, we're about to go over them, but these are the different types of RAID arrays you need to be aware of and know how they work. You need to know how a 0 works, a 1, a 5, 0+1, and 1+0. Those are the main types of RAID arrays you need to be familiar with. All right, so RAID 0. Its nickname is striping. It stripes the data across multiple drives. You need to have at least 2 drives minimum to be able to set up a RAID 0 array. And it has 0 redundancy, meaning if one drive fails, you lose all of your data. How it works is essentially you are siloing your data into 2 different drives. You have your drive A and your drive B. And so imagine each of these is your drive, and how striping works is it's going to drop bit 1, drive A, bit 2, drive B, bit 3, drive A, bit 4, drive B, and it's going to alternate between each drive as it's writing these bits down to the drives themselves. This allows for much greater speed with regards to writing data and reading data from the drives. You get increased storage capacity, faster performance, but you're increasing your exposure because all it takes is one of those 2 drives to fail and you've lost all of your data. So that is a RAID 0. Are there any questions with regards to RAID 0 and how it writes across multiple drives? You can have a minimum of 2, but I think you can continue to go up. I think 7 is the maximum you can do on a RAID 0. And it is called striping. So it's like striping the data across each of the drives. So any questions with regards to RAID 0? All right. Next, we have RAID 1, which is called mirroring or duplexing. It requires 2 drives. You don't gain any additional storage. It might be a little bit slower, but the main thing you gain in this is redundancy. So you have a minimum of 2 drives, and the data is mirrored from one drive to the other. So you have bit 1 would go here, they would duplicate bit 1 over here. Bit 2 would go here, duplicate bit 2 over here, and so on and so forth. So drive B would be an exact mirror of drive A. So RAID 0 called striping, RAID 1 mirroring. And you need a minimum of 2 drives. So if one fails, you're still good. You plug in another drive, resync the drives, and you're good to go. Questions so far with regards to RAID 0 and RAID 1? All right.
This is used within every computer.
No.
Like what? Yeah, that's what. Where will we find this?
No, this is something you can set up in computers. Like if you're going to be doing large amounts of storage, this is something you can set up if you use multiple drives. So in RAID striping 0 for striping, if you have, like you can't find a 16 terabyte hard drive, but you can find 2 8s. So you can sit there and set up RAID 0 with those 2 drives and have it stripe the data across those 2 drives, and they would operate almost as if they were a single unit. Actually could write faster than if it was a single unit because of the multiple heads. And then, but the problem is if one of those drives has like a mechanical failure or, for some reason fails, you lose all of your data because there's no way to recover it. You only have half of what you need.
Got it.
And then RAID 1 is the mirroring, where you are duplicating one drive to the other, and it allows for redundancy. So if a drive fails, you can plug in a new drive and you're good to go. This would typically be for large volume storage, is when somebody would implement a RAID array. Any other questions with regards to RAID?
Is there a maximum for the number for this level?
What, for one?
No,
RAID
yeah,
1?
for one, yeah.
I don't believe there is, but you're, you know, it's kind of one of those things where you have to move up in twos. So you always have to maintain an even number of drives. So as you grow, you can't just add a third drive. You need to add, you know, 2 drives in order to expand it, which can get rather expensive. Would you agree? You have to increase 2 drives for every one that you need. Yes. Jim?
Yeah, that's with RAID 0, right? The 2 drive at a time expanding.
Yeah, no,
Right.
that's for RAID 1 for mirroring. You
Oh,
need to
okay.
increase because one mirrors to the other, so you would need to increase 2 at a time. I think Marvin answered that question for us. You got 32 drives for RAID 1.
For RAID 1, it's 32.
Up to 32, John?
Yeah, up to
Yeah.
32. But for the sake of what we're doing,
They're not gonna
and
ask you that.
CompTIA, you only need to know these 2, 3, and 4. That's what they want you to deal with in the.
Yeah, the minimum number of drives is the more important aspect of this.
Exactly.
Okay, so
And-
you need at least.
Go ahead.
So with RAID 0, how it alternates, how can you go up to, you said 7 disk, but wouldn't you need an 8th to alternate, or it doesn't matter where?
No, because you're not alternating. So if I got, you know, let's see, 3, 4 drives here. So 4 drives for RAID 1 if I increased it from 2 to 4. As it's writing, it's going to go bit 1, bit 2, bit 3, bit 4, and then go back to the beginning. Bit 5, bit 6, bit 7, bit 8.
Okay, got you.
So that's striping the data across all the drives. It's sharing all the drives together and then just, you know, throwing 1 bit at a time into each bucket.
I thought it would go like every 2 and then like do another 2. So I got you.
Yeah, no. It's stripes across all the drives. Mirroring, it's mirroring 1 drive to the other, so they have to be identical.
Gotcha.
So whichever one fails, you're okay. So long as you replace it and resync the drives, all is good. So that would be mirroring and RAID 1.
You're talking about
mirroring.
1, right?
And
When
then
you
2
say
striping.
if one of them is bad, you get rid of it, put another one and resync it. You're talking about RAID 1 though, right?
Yes, because if you lose a drive in RAID 0, what happens?
We lose all the
You
data, right?
lose everything. So RAID 0, you lose a drive, you're done. You have to start back over from scratch. RAID 1, mirroring, you have a duplication of that drive. If a drive goes bad, the RAID array tells you, you pull that drive out, slap in another drive, resync the drives, and you're good to go. So it allows for redundancy of data. Any more questions with regards to RAID 0 or 1? All right, let's up the difficulty level. RAID 5. This one is called striping with parity. Now, do we remember back when we were talking about RAM modules, when we were talking about parity bits? Do we remember what they do? What does the parity bit do?
They find the error.
Finds the error, right? It lets you know whether that sequence you just wrote was odd or even. So very good. Now they're applying that same technology to multiple hard drives. So you get RAID 5, striped with distributed parity. So as you can see here, Think of each row as a letter. So you have A, B, C, D, and E, right? Now what they do is they move that parity bit to different locations in different drives. So for row A, so let me get my annotator going here. So row A, you have bit 1, that's right here. Bit 2 goes here. Bit 3 goes here. So that's a 0. Bit 4 goes here, and it's a 1. So you have 1, 1, 0, 1. That parity bit would make this, it needs to make this odd. So we need a 1 there. So then we would have a total of 4. So the parity bit is used to make it odd. So if in transmission, bit A1 is lost. So I have no idea what A1 is. This is going back to the RAM modules. How do I know whether that was a 1 or a 0?
Work backwards.
By what? So I got 4 bits came in, and then I have my parity bit. How would I know whether this is a 1 or a 0?
Needs to be even.
Needs to be even. So I got a 1 and a 1. Actually, it would need to be odd, right? Because the parity bit tells me 1, so that tells me these 4 bits need to remain odd.
Yeah.
The bit is turning it into an even number. The parity bit's turning it into an even number. So if I have a 1, 0, 1, and then my parity bit says, well, this sequence of 4 needs to be odd, then I know that the bit that was lost was a 1.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes that grouping odd again. So the parity bit now functions. So it serves as a redundancy on the data. So what they've done though is they've distributed that parity bit. So in here it is in row A, in disk 5, in disk 4 is in row B, disk 3 parity bit is in row C, disk 2 parity bit is in row 2 or disk 2, and disk 1 it is in E. So they've moved that parity bit around. Other than that, it's operating. Go ahead.
I don't have money. I have change in my wallet, wherever my wallet is. Pass me my wallet. It's a
All right. Other than that, it is operating as if it is a striping. So it is like a RAID 1, or excuse me, a RAID 0, where it's striping the data, but it is utilizing an extra parity bit on top of that. So bare minimum, we need 3 drives to operate. And then it allows a redundancy of a single drive. So it does not matter which drive I lose, because of the implementation of the parity bit, we can apply a program that can rebuild all the data from that drive because of that parity bit. So if we lost drive 2 right here, in row A, because of the parity bit over here, that tells us that it's a 1. You know, row B, the parity bit is on disk 4, so that will tell us what that missing bit is. Row C, disk 3 has the parity bit, so it tells us what C should be. Disk 4, the parity bit is there, so we lost the parity bit, but all the other data is intact, so we're okay. And then disk 5, or row E, excuse me, disk 1 has the parity bit, and that will help us reconstruct what that missing bit is. Do we have any questions with regards to RAID 5? So striping with parity. The parity allows you to reconstruct the data if a drive is lost. So it has a redundancy level of a single drive. If you lose 2 drives, all is lost. You got no way to recover if you lose 2 drives. But if a single drive is lost, you can plug in a new drive, resync the drives, and you are good to go. This allows for increased storage, increased speed, and it's not quite as expensive as if we had done a full redundancy like RAID 1. This also happens to be one of the most common RAID arrays in use today. Now, in preparation for the exam, I would recommend you drawing out the various RAID arrays, which we'll show you some pictures of them, like some better pictures of them, draw them out and how the data is distributed, and understanding this several times until you fully grasp it, because RAID can become confusing. So any questions with regards to 5 so far? So striping with parity. What was RAID 0? What do we call that nickname?
Striping.
Striping. RAID 1.
Mirroring.
Mirroring. How many? What's our minimum drives for 0?
2.
2. What's our redundancy with 0?
There is no redundancy.
No redundancy. Very good. What's our minimum drives for 1?
2.
2. What's our redundancy?
One drive.
One drive. And the nickname for 1 is?
Mirroring or duplexing.
Mirroring. Very good. Mirroring or duplexing. All right. RAID 5. What's the nickname for that one?
Striping with parity.
Striping with parity. What's our minimum drives?
3.
3. What's our redundancy?
1.
1. All right. 1 plus or RAID 10 and 0 plus 1. It is essentially the same thing, just different in how they place it. So we remember RAID, it is a combination of RAID 0 and RAID 1 put together. And the way you understand it is you have the first part of it is internally into these little silos. So you have 2 RAID 1s that are held together by a RAID 0, and that is RAID 1 plus 0. So if you look at it, we have a RAID 1 array right here. In this one. So RAID 1 is mirroring. So you have bit 1 here, bit 1 here, bit 2 here, bit 2 here, bit 3 here, bit 3 here. They mirror each other. And then it would stripe that data across 2 groups. So RAID, this is second group here, disks 3 and 4, you have bit 2, mirrored bit 2, bit 3, mirror, or excuse me, bit 4, mirrored bit 4. So you have 2 sets of mirrors that are striped across each other. They call this a stripe of mirrors. So it is 2 RAID 1s drives. So you have 2 drives that are RAID 1, another set of 2 drives that are RAID 1, and then they stripe between those 2 sets of mirrors. That's how they create a 1 plus 0. So it's a RAID 1 plus a RAID 0. 0 plus 1 is the exact reverse of it. And that is a mirror of stripes. So you have 2 silos that you're striping the data across. So here's silo 1 and silo 2. And you're striping the data bit 1, bit 2, bit 3, bit 4, down through it. And then you will mirror that entire process to another group of RAID 0 in another silo. So then you would still have that 1, 2, 1, 2. Does this make sense so far? All we're doing is just combining RAID 0 and RAID 1 together into a single RAID unit. Minimum number of drives required to set up a RAID 1 plus 0 or 0 plus 1 is 4. So you have 4 drives you need bare minimum to set it up. The redundancy you have in this is up to half of your drives. And I'll explain. So we have bit 1 here, bit 1 here, bit 3 here, bit 3 here. in the RAID 10. I change the color so we can see it a little better. Now, if I lose disk 1, I'm okay, right? Because I could just, resync with disk 2, since that is, the mirrored drive, and I'm good to go, right? Well, I could also lose, say, disk 4. So if I lose disk 1 and 4, I'm okay, because then I can replace 1 and 4 and then resync from their mirrored drives. All good. If, however, I lose disks 1 and 2, I've lost all my data. That's what they mean by the up to half of your drives. So it is very specific as to which drives you can lose and still be okay.
So even if you lost, let's say 2 and 4, you could still resync though, right?
Yes, in a RAID 1+0, I could lose 2. So let me do it here. So if I lost drive 2 and drive 4, I'm okay.
So as long as you don't lose both the mirrored ones that are the same, you won't lose the data, right?
Excellent. That's exactly correct. Now let's step over to RAID 0+1. What 2 drives, let me number them here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. List off 2 drives I can lose in this RAID array and still be okay.
Put it in chat. It'll be easier to see more people come up with the answer besides yelling it out. So DS says 2 and 4.
Oh,
TJ
shit.
says 2 and 3.
Getting some conflicting data here.
Yeah, 1 and 2 for double back, 1 and 2. 1 and 2 for TK.
Okay. We gotta look at the way our data is distributed.
Right.
Make it a little easier to see. So in this particular one, I lost drive 1 and drive 2, I would be okay.
Exactly.
If I lost drive 1 and drive 4, I would be okay. If I lost drive 1 and 3, I'm done.
Trouble.
If I lost drives 2 and 4, I'm done. 2 and 3, still okay.
3 and 4, still okay.
So it's just understanding how the data is distributed to better understand where the redundancy lies and why they say specifically up to half. All right.
That's heavy stuff. So if you have questions, speak on it.
Here's a way to kind of sum it up for you pretty good. RAID 0, minimum drives 2, number of functional failures allowed 0. 1, minimum RAID 1, minimum 2 drives, number of functional failures 1. RAID 5, minimum drives 3, functional drive failures allowed 1. And then 1+0 and 0+1 both require 4 minimum drives, up to 2 failures. Any questions with regards to RAID? This is a big one for the exam, so it's definitely one you want to have pretty well ingrained in your brain, but don't worry. You will have written down and gone over RAID arrays so much by the time the exam comes, you don't want to hear about it anymore because you will have had to have repeated ad nauseum. We also have a nice power cert video with regards to RAID arrays that we will drop in Slack a little bit later. Also, Professor Messer does a really good video on it as well, breaking it down, giving you a little bit more visuals as to how the data is distributed. So those are good alternative resources as well, but this is definitely something you want to be comfortable with when it comes to the exam. All right. Hardware versus software RAID. Hardware, the controller and all that stuff, the chips, everything is in the RAID unit itself. It is managing it on site on the unit. It allows for hot swapping, so you don't need to shut it fully down before you re-implement the hard drive. And it is definitely used when performance is the main priority, as well as speed, but it is a more expensive way to implement it because you're buying very specific devices for this. Then you have software RAID. More recent iterations of Microsoft have RAID controllers already built into them. They unfortunately tend to overwork the operating system because the operating system has to determine which drives you need to write the stuff to, as well as where to go to collect this particular information. Now, old version of Windows Server, which is kind of becoming a legacy, allows for RAID 0, 1, and 5 and works with both SATA and PATA connectors. 7 and 8 in disk management, you can build up a RAID 0 or 1. 8.1 and 10 allow for RAID 1 and 5. And as we stated, RAID 5 is the most popular because it is one of the most economical ways to do it, as well as offering the highest performance. But you would use an operating system or software RAID when price is more of a consideration rather than performance. Questions so far? So hardware RAID is built into the RAID unit itself. Software RAID is utilizing your operating system already on your machine. Questions? Did we learn way more about drives than we wanted to?
Not really.
Not really? Okay. I like it. All right. Factors to consider when purchasing hard drives. Obviously, the capacity. How much can it store? How much of my goodies can I put on this hard drive before I have to upgrade to a new one? Do I want to future-proof that drive? What is the spindle speed if I'm talking about mechanical drives? How fast can I access that data that I am storing on there? If I'm utilizing this for gaming and stuff like that, mechanical drive might be a little too slow. I may need to upgrade to something else. Interface standard. How is it going to connect to and talk to my system? That's also going to help determine the rate at which this data can be transferred. If I can use SATA, eSATA, PATA, SCSI, USBs, Firewire, 800 or 400. This needs to be taken into account because if you're picking up a drive, it only has Firewire connections and your system does not allow for that because it is already, consider that technology obsolete and remove the connectors from its system, then Firewire would no longer be a viable connection for you. The cache or buffer size for the hard drives. This is specific mostly to mechanic hard drives, and the buffer memory in place helps improve performance for reading and writing. So if the drive is not able to keep up at that moment, it can hold it in buffer so that it does not slow down your performance at that time. These steps should be becoming pretty familiar as we move through a lot of these technical sessions. So we're going to go through them pretty quick. Steps to installing a hard drive. First step, always the same. Power it down, unplug it, press the button and hold it for 5 seconds. to disperse the residual charge in the capacitors. Remove the computer case. Determine which bay you are going to be installing this drive in, and examine the location to make sure that you have the length in the power cords, the room to put it in, all that fun stuff. If you're putting in a smaller drive into a desktop, make sure you have that adapter so that you can kick it up from a 2.5 to a 3.5 inch drive, so it will fit securely and not be flopping around inside the tower. Now, if it's a stationary bay, you're going to remove the cover for that bay, slide this drive right into place using a screwdriver to secure it into place, typically 1 or 2 screws. Some of them actually have sliding tabs. That is becoming more and more common rather than the actual old school screws. And then you would need to hook it up either utilizing the SATA or IDE cables, depending on the drive and the computer you are using. Then you would connect either your SATA power or your 4-pin Molex or mini Molex to give that the unit the power it needs to operate. Check all your connections, double check your connections, make sure everything is snug and fit, and then close the system back up, plug it back in, and pray. Go ahead and turn it on. All right, here is a quick look at drive bays. You can kind of see what they look like with regards to installing drives into them.
One on the right is super cool because all you got to do is slide your hard drive in there, and if you notice the tabs on the side, once you push it forward, it locks it in place. Whereas the one on the left, you have to actually screw it into a bracket system. So it would be super neat if you had a case that worked like the one on the right. You'll see both of these out and about in the industry, but if you run into the one on the right, it's a good day, especially if you having to pull out drives, push drives in. Needless to say, it's not hard. You get your Phillips head screwdriver, because we prefer that over flat, because you'll see more Phillips in the out and about. And you just unscrew it from the bracket that's holding it, and you'll just slide it on out.
There we go.
And the left is cheaper, because it's just a screw, whereas the right one, some thought was put into that to set it up that way. It's easier, more convenient. And I've seen and used both in my short stint while working in IT healthcare when I had to pull out some drives.
Yeah, nice. All right, troubleshooting hard drives. Slow performance. Typically comes from, when the drives become overly full, or if you have read and wrote and deleted data repeatedly over time. At a certain point, the data itself becomes fragmented. This is for mechanical drives only. When that is the case, you need to run a defragmentation tool on the drive, which puts all like data together so that the drive can locate it very quickly. Unfortunately, you need, I think it's roughly 20%, Marvin, of open data space available to be able to read and write to the hard drive for the defragmentation tool. This will more often than not increase performance. So if it's just working very slowly when it's trying to find things or read things or write to the hard drives, it just means your data is scattered all over the place, because we will show how the drives actually work later with regards to how they write data and look for and read that data. But defragmentation tool helps correct that problem. Problems during boot. UEFI or BIOS is not able to locate the drive and gives you a error saying you cannot locate where the drive is. That point, open it up, remove cables, reattach cables just to make sure they are firmly connected in place. Remember, we talked about chip creep that can happen over time. So don't automatically assume the drive has failed at that point. If you have already tried swapping out the drive, it's still not happening, still not able to read it, just inspect both the drive and your connectors. Make sure you don't have things such as bent pins or damaged pins or missing pins, so that it can read and write properly to the drives. One of the big things, if it's mechanical drive, just listen to it, make sure it's getting power. Is it spinning up when you turn the computer on? Is it constantly working? Look for the cables, see if the cables are frayed or damaged. If that is the case, replace them so that you can improve performance. Oftentimes people don't even think of just worrying about the cables themselves. They immediately go to the unit is damaged, and there is a much cheaper and faster option just to replace a cable many times, and that could correct your problem. If that cable has been yanked on, bent, stepped on, smashed, what have you, multiple times, then the internal wires inside of it could be frayed, broken, damaged, bent, and no longer work at optimal speeds. Check your UEFI or BIOS for errors in drive configuration. Just make sure it is able to see it. And then the other case would be try booting from another media like a optical drive or a flash drive and see if the issue lies somewhere else, not necessarily in the hard drive itself. Questions so far? All right. At the end of this particular technical session, we should now be able to describe the purpose and types of characteristics of storage devices, such as optical drives, solid state, compact flash, hybrid, tape, and so on. We should be able to explain the purpose and types of RAID. We should be able to describe the process to installing a storage device into the computer, and we should be able to identify common hardware problems, hard drive problems, and how to address them. Any questions so far?